Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. While the Biden administration touts that his new border policies have proven effective, his latest measures are meeting with strong opposition, this time from Democrats. 77 Democrats on Capitol Hill are decrying asylum restrictions, accusing the Biden administration of reviving Trump-era border policies. NTD's Melina Wisecup brings us more.
Anyone who tells you that the only way to secure our border is to punish asylum seekers is lying. It's why we are appalled to see President Biden replicate President Trump's immigration strategy.
Some Democrats on Capitol Hill today decrying the Biden administration's recently enacted border policies. Earlier this month, the administration implemented new enforcement and parole measures targeted at countries like Haiti, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Now, under this new enforcement and parole policy, the administration is expanding the legal pathway for immigrants from those countries up to 30,000 per month to come into the U.S. legally if they have an eligible sponsor. If they come illegally from those countries, they will be subject to expedited removal plus a 5-year ban on re-entry. Now, the DHS this week has touted this new enforcement and parole measure as effective in addressing the border surge, writing that they've seen a 97% decline compared to last month in illegal crossings from those particular countries. And while this new policy that the administration has enacted does provide for a 2-year humanitarian parole and work authorization, this is still not enough for some Democrats on Capitol Hill.
We're here today because we expect more from the Biden administration than we did from the Trump administration.
77 Democrats wrote a letter to President Biden urging him to quickly end Title 42, also opposing an expected proposal by the Biden administration that would require asylum seekers to apply for asylum in the countries that they're traveling through to get to the U.S. Those Democrats say that they believe this resembles a Trump-era rule known as a transit ban and should be rejected. But the White House denies that this proposal is anything like Trump's. As for the asylum system as a whole, there is a growing number of asylum claims that are causing a backlog in that system, causing those who have legitimate asylum claims to have extended periods of wait time. And I asked Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez if she thinks that one solution to these backlogs would be clarifying what actually qualifies as a legitimate asylum claim. Here's what she said.
When we look at our work here in Congress, we devote so many resources to places in DHS that are very focused on enforcement and not enough resources in places like USCIS to ensure that we can process these backlogs.
And lawmakers from both parties do acknowledge that the immigration system does need to be updated, but with Republicans pushing for border security first and Democrats pushing for a pathway to citizenship first, this leaves the two parties miles apart on an agreement that could actually update the outdated immigration laws. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Should the president be able to use America's strategic petroleum reserves to try to lower gas prices for Americans and at the same time selling it to foreign countries? House Democrats and Republicans debated this very issue before they voted on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Act. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Gas prices are currently about 35% higher than when President Biden first took office. And Biden has blamed the high energy prices on, quote, Putin's price hike. In an effort to lower the price at the pump for Americans, the Biden administration began using America's strategic oil reserves. House Republicans disagree with this use of the strategic reserves, saying it should be used for emergencies only. They debated House Democrats on Thursday before they voted on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Act. The bill would prohibit the use of strategic reserves to lower gas prices, but allow it to be used if the president declares an emergency because of an energy shortage. And if the president doesn't declare an emergency, his administration would need to provide a plan that encourages domestic energy production.
As you can see, this president has raided more than 40% of America's strategic reserve. Our piggy bank, he's just taken it away. In some cases, he actually sold that oil to China. And if you're going to raid the piggy bank, at minimum, show the country your plan for how you plan to replace it. That's the least this president should do.
And on the other side of the aisle, Representative Frank Pallone Jr. said this.
I have to point out that Republican presidents have done this many times in the past. I think the only reason why they are criticizing President Biden is because they know it worked. Now, if you don't feel that that's something that we should do, you can say it. But the bottom line is, as Democrats, we were trying, and the president was trying, to address an affordability issue. You know, Americans don't want to have to pay high prices for gas, and they should not have to if we can do something about it.
Gentleman's time's expired.
On Monday, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm said that if the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Act passes Congress, President Biden would veto it. Jason Perry, NTD News.
As scrutiny continues over classified documents, President Biden touting new economic data today while criticizing Republicans. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Here at a Union Hall in Springfield, Virginia, President Biden gave his first major economic speech of the year. He touts what he calls economic accomplishments.
And inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months.
And seeks to take credit for new economic data showing the U.S. GDP grew 2.9% at the end of last year.
Economic growth is up. They've been telling me since I got elected we're going to be in a recession. Every time we've gotten better.
Another major theme of the speech is bashing House Republicans over their tax and spending plans. Since taking the majority, House Republicans have introduced various ideas that the Biden administration has slammed as benefiting the rich. That includes a 30% national sales tax, abolishing the income tax, and eliminating the Internal Revenue Service.
MAGA Republicans in the House of Representatives who are threatening to destroy this progress.
The Republicans are on the offense, accusing Biden's policies of causing inflation.
Anything you buy now costs more money because of Joe Biden's policies, and he's trying to claim that that's actually lowered costs.
And the House Majority Leader defends Republicans' agenda, highlighting a need to cut spending.
We strongly believe that Social Security needs to be strengthened for seniors who paid into it. But the bigger question is, can we get spending under control in Washington?
The Thursday speech also comes amid a standoff between the White House and Republicans over raising the debt ceiling. Republicans are pushing for federal spending cuts.
There's not $1 of wasteful spending in government. Who believes that?
But the White House is refusing to negotiate, insisting that a debt ceiling should be raised unconditionally. Reporting in Springfield, Virginia, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And the president is reportedly considering traveling to Europe next month, and that'll be around the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The trip has not yet been confirmed by the White House. One of the latest focal points between Democrats and Republicans in Congress is the looming debt ceiling crisis. President Biden is not planning to negotiate the limit with Republicans, and some House Democrats are proposing to eliminate the debt ceiling altogether. To discuss this dispute, we sat down with Virginia Congressman Bob Good. Congressman Bob Good, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Steve. Thanks for having me again.
Of course. Congressman, with regard to the debt ceiling, do you see a plan where Republicans and Democrats can get to without defaulting on the debt? And how big of a challenge do you think this will be for Speaker McCarthy?
I think any reasonable person in Congress or in the executive branch should recognize that we need to be responsible and we've got to cut our spending. We can't continue to do what we've been doing. I'm pleased with what Speaker McCarthy has been saying. He's saying all the right things, saying we've got to cut our spending to put us on a path to fiscal responsibility. It is clearly irresponsible and denying reality for the president to be saying he's not going to negotiate on cutting spending in order to get a debt ceiling increase.
Now, I'm not being facetious when I ask you this, but when you talk to your Democratic colleagues or hear what they're saying on the Hill, is there a limit that they would draw the line at?
Well, sadly, I think that we will have to use the leverage of the debt ceiling to negotiate fiscal responsibility and spending cuts because the Democrats unfortunately have shown no appetite for cutting spending. It's almost as if, Steve, they don't think that the money is real or the debt is real. As you may know, I serve on the Budget Committee again, and I had the budget chairman say during the course of the last Congress, when I was on the House floor in a debate over a spending bill, I said, hey, we owe nearly $100,000 per citizen now in the amount of national debt. When you take now nearly $32 trillion divided by 330 million Americans. And he said, stop saying that. We're not asking anybody to pay that back. But the burden of just carrying the debt and paying to service the debt, especially with the increase in the interest rates caused by this administration, quite frankly, and their response to their caused inflation. They've caused inflation, and then they react with more inflation causing interest rate increases, which have priced Americans out of housing and cars and everything else that's financed. So I don't think Democrats take seriously the national debt or take seriously the spending crisis, so that's why we've got to use the debt ceiling as leverage to force them to deal with it.
And as you mentioned, I mean, I feel as though there is going to have to be pain in order to get this under control. You've introduced a series of legislation. One of your plans, I believe you dubbed it the nickel plan. Tell us how you think this would work.
Well, what that would do is cut 5 cents out of every federal dollar for the next 4 years to force us to get to a balanced budget. Most of us would probably recognize that it would be more effective or more efficient to have targeted reductions in spending versus across the board. But what the nickel plan would do would force us to address our spending, and if we didn't do it, it would cut spending by 5% or 5 cents for every dollar. We've got an estimated $1 trillion of unaccounted for COVID spending, over the last 2 years. There's billions of dollars that we're borrowing money to send overseas. We're sending $100 billion that we borrow to Ukraine. I don't think most Americans would say we should borrow money to send it to other countries. We've removed the work requirements as we've grown the welfare state. You've got 2 million less Americans working than you had 2 years ago. There's lots of places we can look to. Diversity, equity, and inclusion spending ought to be taken out of every agency and department. Climate, environmental extremism ought to be taken out of every department. Those are just some of the things that we could do.
I just want to switch gears a little bit, Congressman, ask you about another bill that you've introduced called the Pistol Act. There's been a series of what you'd call mass shootings over the past week in California. This often raises the issue of gun control. What do you think the proper approach is? How should the discussion be had right now?
Well, thankfully, we have a Constitution in this country, and thankfully, we have a Bill of Rights and a Second Amendment that protects what we Republicans and conservatives believe our God-given rights to self-defense and our God-given right to be armed as citizens to ensure we remain a free people. That is what it's about. It's a check on tyranny to make sure that we remain free. Democrats don't like that we have a Constitution. They don't like we have a Bill of Rights. They don't like we have a Second Amendment, and they continue to make efforts to erode that and restrict that. And so what my bill would basically say, it pushes back against the ATF regulation, unelected bureaucrats trying to further penalize law-abiding citizens because of the actions of those who break the law. But I have a rural suburban district in Virginia where we have a lot of concealed carry and open carry in Virginia, and I feel much safer in my district in Virginia, where there's lots of weapons by citizens who are carrying constitutionally, than I do here in Washington, D.C., where gun rights are restricted for law-abiding citizens.
We often hear that we're not trying to take away all guns, just certain guns. Does that, raise concern that eventually it will become a handgun, a pistol, so on and so forth?
There's no question that it's a slippery slope. The Democrats and the left want to eliminate the right to have guns in this country. It is definitely, the camel's nose in the tent each time that they restrict the rights of law-abiding citizens to defend themselves, to keep and bear arms. Congress does not have the authority constitutionally to restrict the rights of citizens to bear arms, law-abiding citizens. Certainly unelected bureaucrats in the ATF and the Biden administration don't have the ability to do that by fiat. And frankly, to take an example of the pistol brace, to say, okay, we're going to retroactively make you a criminal for something you bought lawfully, now we're going to change the law, or at least change the regulation and restrict your right and make you a criminal for something you bought lawfully in a previous time period.
Congressman Bob Good, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.